I never thought my father's death would divide our family like this. My name is Rebecca, and I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. For 32 years, I believed we were close. We celebrated birthdays together, shared holidays, laughed at inside jokes that only we understood. But money has a way of revealing who people really are, doesn't it? The day we gathered at the lawyer's office, I could feel the tension in the air. My brothers Marcus, Dylan, and Christopher sat across from me, their suits pressed and expressions serious. They'd flown in from different cities, probably calculating their shares on the plane ride over. I wore a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to Dad's funeral 3 weeks earlier. My hands were still shaking, not from anticipation of wealth, but from the hole his absence had left in my life. Mr. Harrison, Dad's attorney for over 20 years, cleared his throat and adjusted his reading glasses. He was an older man with kind eyes, the type who'd probably seen every family drama imaginable play out in this very room. Mr. Harrison said, "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time. Your father was very specific about his wishes, and I'm here to honor them." I watched my brothers lean forward, ready to hear the numbers. Christopher, the eldest at 41, had always been the businessman. He owned 3 car dealerships and lived in a mansion with his wife and 2 kids. Marcus, 38, was a surgeon with a thriving practice in Boston. Dylan, 35, worked in tech and had just sold his startup for a fortune. And then there was me, the art teacher who lived in a modest apartment and could barely afford to fix my car when it broke down. Mr. Harrison continued, "To my sons, Marcus, Dylan, and Christopher, I leave equal shares of my financial assets, totaling 50 million Reais each." The room erupted, not with joy, but with this strange energy I can't quite describe. My brothers tried to maintain composure, but I saw it. The satisfaction in Christopher's eyes, the slight smile on Marcus's lips, the way Dylan immediately pulled out his phone, probably to text his wife. I sat there, numb. 50 million Reais, each. I didn't expect to receive the same amount. I knew Dad had worked hard to build his construction company, and my brothers had all gone into business or medicine like he'd hoped. I'd chosen art, which disappointed him for years. But still, I was his daughter, his only daughter. Mr. Harrison looked at me, and something in his expression softened. Mr. Harrison said, "And to my daughter Rebecca, I leave this." He slid an old yellowed envelope across the table. That's it, an envelope. I could feel my brothers watching me, probably feeling a mix of pity and relief that they didn't have to share their inheritance with me. The envelope was thin, worn at the edges, and had my name written in Dad's handwriting. Christopher spoke up, trying to sound sympathetic but failing. "Well, that's unfortunate. Maybe there's a check inside, Becca." Marcus added, "Dad always had his reasons." Dylan didn't say anything. He was already typing on his phone, probably emailing his financial advisor. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Mr. Harrison gave me a small nod, and I understood. Whatever was inside, Dad wanted me to read it privately. The meeting concluded quickly after that. My brothers made plans to go out for drinks to celebrate. Nobody invited me. I wasn't surprised. I drove home in my 12-year-old sedan, the envelope sitting in the passenger seat like a ghost. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend it didn't exist. My father had just confirmed what I'd always feared, that I wasn't valued the same way my brothers were. That choosing passion over profit had cost me his respect, and now apparently, his consideration and death. My apartment felt especially empty that evening. I'd moved in after my divorce 2 years ago. Daniel, my ex-husband, had been supportive of my teaching career until he wasn't. Until he realized art teachers don't make 6 figures. Until he met someone whose ambition matched his own. The divorce left me with almost nothing, and I'd been rebuilding ever since. I made tea and sat at my small kitchen table. The envelope seemed to glow under the overhead light. For an hour, I just stared at it. Finally, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Dad's careful script. The paper was old, dated from 28 years ago. I would have been 4 years old. I began to read. The letter started, "My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you can forgive what might seem like a cruel decision. Your brothers will receive money, lots of it, because that's what they value. That's what they understand. But you, my sweet girl, you were always different." Tears started falling before I could stop them. Dad's letter continued, "I'm writing this after watching you spend an entire afternoon painting a picture for your mother's birthday. You were only 4 years old, but you worked on it for hours. Your brothers asked you to play, but you said no. You had something important to finish. When you finally showed it to us, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Not because of skill, you were only 4, but because of the love poured into every brushstroke. I remembered that painting. Mom had framed it and kept it in her bedroom until she died when I was 15. The letter went on. I watched you grow up different from your brothers. They competed for grades, for achievements, for my approval. You competed with yourself, always trying to be kinder, more creative, more authentic. When your brothers came to me with their problems, they wanted solutions. When you came to me, you wanted to understand people's hearts. I had to stop reading. The pain was too much. Dad had seen me, really seen me, and I'd spent so many years thinking I'd disappointed him. After composing myself, I continued reading. I know I wasn't good at showing you how proud I was. I'm a man of business, and I pushed your brothers into that world because I understood it. But you, Rebecca, you scared me. Your talent, your heart, your ability to see beauty in everything. I didn't know how to nurture that. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough. My chest felt like it was caving in. All those years, all those dinners where he'd ask my brothers about their deals and their successes, then turn to me and just nod when I talked about my students. I'd thought he didn't care. The letter continued with words that would change everything. So here's what I'm leaving you. Not money, because you've never been motivated by it. I'm leaving you something more valuable. In my safe deposit box at First National Bank, box number 372, you'll find the deed to the old warehouse on Maritime Street. Do you remember that building? I gasped. Of course I remembered. It was the building I'd fallen in love with when I was 16. We'd driven past it one day, and I'd made Dad stop the car. It was this beautiful old structure with huge windows and exposed brick. I'd told him it would make the perfect art studio and gallery. He'd laughed and said I was a dreamer. Dad wrote, I bought it the next week. I've been paying for it all these years, waiting for the right time to give it to you. I've also set up a trust fund, separate from your brother's inheritance, that will cover the property taxes and basic maintenance for the next 10 years. After that, it's up to you what you do with it. I couldn't breathe. I read the words again and again. He'd bought it, 28 years ago. He'd been holding on to it all this time. The letter concluded, your brothers will take their money and probably triple it. They're good at that. But you, my Rebecca, you're going to take this space and fill it with beauty. You're going to teach kids who feel different, who don't fit into the mold. You're going to create a place where art matters more than profit. And that, my daughter, is worth more than all the money in the world. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't say it enough. Your father. I sobbed. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I didn't know existed. He'd understood. All along, he'd understood. The warehouse wasn't just a building. It was his way of saying he believed in me, in my path, in everything I'd chosen that was different from my brothers. The next morning, I went to the bank. The manager, Mrs. Chen, seemed to expect me. Mrs. Chen said, Ms. Turner, your father left specific instructions. He came in 3 months ago to update everything. He was very clear about his wishes. She led me to the safe deposit box and left me alone with it. Inside was the deed, just as Dad had said. But there was more. There were architectural plans, drawn up by a professional firm, showing how the warehouse could be converted into a community arts center. There were lists of contractors, budgets, timelines. Dad had planned everything. There was also a small velvet box. Inside was Mom's wedding ring and a note. Your mother wanted you to have this. She always knew you'd understand what love really means. I spent the next week in a daze. I went to see the warehouse, which was even more beautiful than I remembered. The bones were solid, the space was enormous, and those windows. Those magnificent windows that would flood the space with natural light. My brothers called, each one separately. Christopher wanted to make sure I was okay financially. His tone suggested he thought I'd gotten nothing. Marcus offered to help me contest the will if I wanted. Dylan sent a text asking if I needed money. Their pity felt heavy, condescending. I didn't tell them about the warehouse, not yet. Instead, I threw myself into planning. I met with contractors, applied for nonprofit status, reached out to other art teachers. The vision became clear. This wouldn't just be my studio. It would be a place where kids from low-income families could take free art classes, where local artists could show their work, where creativity mattered more than credentials. My best friend Jasmine was the first person I told. We'd been friends since college, and she'd stood by me through my divorce and all the years of financial struggle. I explained everything to Jasmine, and she just stared at me with tears in her eyes. Jasmine said, Becca, do you realize what this means? You're going to change lives. Kids who would never have access to art education are going to have a chance because of you. I replied, because of Dad. He set this up. He believed in this before I even knew it was possible. Jasmine shook her head. No, he believed in you. There's a difference. The renovation took 8 months, but those 8 months felt like a lifetime. Every single day brought new challenges that tested my resolve in ways I'd never experienced. The first contractor I hired took my deposit and disappeared. 5,000 Reais, gone. Money I'd saved from 3 years of teaching summer school. I cried in my car for an hour after discovering his phone was disconnected and his office abandoned. I called Jasmine, barely able to speak through my tears. I managed to say to her, maybe this is a sign. Maybe I'm not supposed to do this. Maybe Dad was wrong about me. Jasmine drove over immediately. She found me still sitting in my car outside the empty contractor's office. Jasmine said firmly, pulling open my car door, Rebecca Turner, you listen to me. One bad person doesn't define this journey. Your father believed in you. I believe in you. But more importantly, you need to believe in yourself. Now get out of this car and let's figure out the next step. That next step came through Mr. Harrison, Dad's attorney. When I told him what happened, he made some calls. Within 2 days, he'd connected me with Antonio, a contractor who'd worked on several of Dad's projects over the years. Antonio was in his 60s with weathered hands and kind eyes. He walked through the warehouse with me, taking notes, asking questions about my vision. Antonio said to me after the tour, your father was a good man. He paid me fairly when other developers tried to shortchange my crew. I'll do this project at cost. No markup, just materials and labor. I started crying again, something I was doing a lot those days. I told him, I can't ask you to do that. Antonio shook his head. You're not asking. I'm offering. Besides, what you're building here matters. My grandson, he struggles in school, feels like he doesn't fit anywhere, but he loves to draw. Maybe when this place opens, he can come here. That's how it started. One person believing in the mission, then another, then another. Antonio brought his crew, and they worked with a dedication I'd never seen. They didn't just see it as a job. They saw it as a calling. But the challenges kept coming, each one feeling like a test of my commitment. The electrical system needed to be completely rewired. That wasn't in the budget. The roof had leak damage I hadn't noticed during the initial inspection, and when it rained, water poured through the ceiling in 3 different places, ruining supplies I'd barely been able to afford. The heating and cooling system was beyond repair, and winter was approaching fast. I spent nights lying awake doing math that never worked out. Numbers swirled in my head until I couldn't think straight. The trust fund Dad had set up covered property taxes and basic maintenance, but not major renovations. I'd taken out a small business loan at a terrible interest rate because my credit wasn't great after the divorce. I'd maxed out 3 credit cards, watching the balances climb higher and higher each month. I'd borrowed 15,000 Reais from Jasmine, money she'd saved for years, and I had absolutely no idea how I'd ever repay her. There were creditors calling daily. I stopped answering my phone unless I recognized the number. My landlord threatened eviction because I was 2 months behind on rent, having poured every dollar into the warehouse. I lost 12 pounds because I was skipping meals to save money. My car broke down, and I couldn't afford to fix it, so I took buses everywhere, adding hours to my already exhausting days. My principal at school pulled me aside one afternoon, concern written all over her face. Principal Martinez said gently, Rebecca, I'm worried about you. You look exhausted. You're losing weight. Is everything okay? I wanted to tell her everything. About the warehouse, about the debt, about feeling like I was drowning, but I just smiled and said I was fine. Because if I started talking about it, I might break down completely, and I couldn't afford to break down. Too many people were counting on me. But Principal Martinez wasn't fooled. She'd known me for 8 years, had supported my teaching through difficult times. She continued, her voice firm but kind. I know you're working on something outside of school. I can see it in your eyes. That determination mixed with terror. I've been there. When I started this school's arts program 20 years ago, everyone told me it was a waste of resources. But I fought for it because I knew it mattered. So I'm going to tell you what someone told me back then. Don't give up right before the miracle happens. Those words sustained me through the darkest weeks. Don't give up right before the miracle happens. I repeated them like a mantra when I wanted to quit, when the obstacles seemed insurmountable, when I lay awake at 3 a.m. wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. There was a moment, about 4 months into the renovation, when I seriously considered giving up. I was at the warehouse late one evening, sitting on the concrete floor surrounded by exposed wiring and half-finished drywall. My phone was full of messages from creditors. My bank account was overdrawn. I had $63 to my name and 2 weeks until rent was due. I pulled out Dad's letter and read it again by the light of a construction lamp. I spoke out loud to him, even though he was gone. Dad, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not strong enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough money or resources or knowledge. Maybe you put your faith in the wrong person. My voice echoed in the empty space. No answer came, because of course it didn't. Dad was gone, and I was alone with an impossible dream and mounting debt. Then my phone rang. It was Elena Rodriguez, a woman I'd taught with years ago before she moved to New York to work for a major art foundation. Elena said excitedly, "Rebecca, I just heard about your project from a mutual friend. This is exactly the kind of initiative our foundation supports. Can you put together a grant proposal?" I sat up straighter. "How much are we talking about?" Elena replied, "For the right project, we can grant up to $100,000. Get me a proposal by next week, and I'll push it through the fast-track review process." I worked for 5 days straight on that proposal. I barely slept, living on coffee and adrenaline. I documented every aspect of the center, created financial projections, gathered letters of support from community leaders, and poured my heart into explaining why this mattered. Jasmine helped me edit it, staying up until 3 in the morning the night before the deadline. Jasmine said while reading through my draft, "This sentence here, where you talk about art saving your life after your divorce. That's powerful. Lead with that. Make it personal." I rewrote the introduction, letting myself be vulnerable in a way I usually avoided. I wrote about feeling worthless after Daniel left, about questioning everything I'd chosen, about how returning to my art pulled me back from a dark place, about wanting to give that lifeline to other people who felt lost. 2 weeks after submitting the proposal, Elena called. Elena told me, her voice full of emotion, "Rebecca, the board met yesterday. They approved your grant, not for $100,000, for $250,000. They want this to become a flagship model for community art centers nationwide." I dropped the phone. Literally dropped it. When I picked it up, I was sobbing so hard I couldn't speak. Elena continued, "Are you there, Rebecca?" I finally managed to say, "I'm here. I can't believe this is real." Elena said warmly, "It's real. You did this. Your passion, your vision, your refusal to give up. That's what convinced them. The money will be wired next week." After I hung up, I drove straight to the cemetery where Dad was buried. I sat by his headstone and told him everything. About the struggles, the doubts, the moments I wanted to quit, and about this miracle that had just happened. I said to his grave, running my hand over the cold stone, "You knew, didn't you? You knew I'd have to fight for this, that it couldn't come easy, because if it came easy, I wouldn't value it the same way. Thank you for believing I could do hard things. I'm starting to believe it too." I stayed there for over an hour, just sitting in the grass next to his grave, feeling more connected to him than I had since he died. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree nearby. I told him about every challenge I'd faced, every moment of doubt, every time I'd wanted to call it quits. And I thanked him for the gift that had seemed so cruel at first, but had become the greatest blessing of my life. When I finally stood to leave, I felt different, lighter, more certain. The grant was validation that this path was right. But more than that, it was proof that when you pour your heart into something meaningful, the universe conspires to help you succeed. Or maybe it was Dad, watching from wherever he was, making sure I had what I needed to fulfill the vision he'd seen in me all along. With the grant money, everything changed in ways both practical and spiritual. We could hire skilled craftspeople who took pride in their work. We could buy quality materials that would last decades instead of cheap alternatives that would need replacing in a few years. We could install the heating and cooling system properly, fix the roof with materials that would withstand any storm, and rewire the electrical system to code and beyond. But more than the physical changes, something shifted in me. I stopped feeling like an imposter who'd stumbled into something too big for her. I started introducing myself as the founder and director of the Turner Center for Creative Arts with confidence that came from deep in my bones. I made decisions without second-guessing every choice for hours afterward. I asked for help when I needed it and accepted that I didn't have to do everything alone, that collaboration was strength, not weakness. Antonio's grandson Miguel started volunteering on weekends, helping paint and learning construction skills. He was 15, quiet, always drawing in a worn sketchbook during breaks. One Saturday, I caught him sketching the warehouse interior. His drawing was incredible, full of detail and perspective that showed real talent. I said to Miguel, "That's beautiful. You have a gift." He shrugged, embarrassed. "It's just something I do. My dad says it's a waste of time, that I should focus on real skills." I sat down next to him on a stack of lumber. "Miguel, art is a real skill. It's how we make sense of the world. It's how we communicate things words can't express. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't matter. He looked at me with eyes full of hope and doubt. But you can't make money as an artist, right? That's what everyone says. I thought about how to answer honestly without crushing his dreams. It's hard, I won't lie. I'm a teacher, not a professional artist because I needed stability. But I use my art every single day. It makes me happy. It gives my life meaning. And now I'm building this place so kids like you can explore that gift without judgment. That's worth more than money to me. Miguel nodded slowly, then went back to his drawing. But something in his posture had changed. He sat a little straighter, drew with a little more confidence. These small moments happened constantly during the renovation. The single mother who came to interview for our administrative assistant position and broke down crying when I offered her the job because she'd been unemployed for 8 months. The local artist who donated 20 canvases and a year's worth of acrylic paints because she'd grown up poor and never had access to supplies. The retired teacher who volunteered to organize our library of art books because she believed every child deserved exposure to great art. Each person who joined the mission added another thread to the fabric we were weaving. It wasn't just me building this center anymore. It was a community creating something together. My brothers found out about the project when a local newspaper ran a story. "Teacher creates free art center for underprivileged youth," read the headline. My phone exploded with calls. Christopher was the first to confront me. We met at a coffee shop downtown. He looked angry, confused. Christopher demanded, "Why didn't you tell us? We thought Dad left you with nothing. We felt bad for you." I stirred my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "He left me with everything that mattered." Christopher scoffed. "A rundown warehouse? Rebecca, do you know what you could have done with 50 million Reais?" I met his eyes. "What would I have done with it, Chris? Bought a bigger apartment I didn't need? A car I couldn't afford to maintain? That money would have changed me into someone I'm not." Christopher leaned back, frustrated. "So you're saying we're materialistic? That we don't have values?" I shook my head. "I'm saying Dad knew what each of us needed. You needed capital to expand your business. Marcus needed to invest in his practice. Dylan needed financial security. I needed a purpose." Christopher left angry. Marcus called that evening, more measured in his approach. Marcus said to me over the phone, "I read the article. It's impressive what you're doing. But Becca, be realistic. How are you going to sustain this? The trust fund will run out." I had thought about this constantly. "I'm applying for grants, setting up a donation system. I'm going to make it work because it has to work. These kids need this." Marcus sighed. "You always were the idealist in the family." I asked him, "Is that a bad thing?" He was quiet for a moment. No, I guess it's not. Dylan surprised me by showing up at the warehouse unannounced one Saturday. I was painting one of the walls with a group of teenagers I'd recruited for a summer program. Dylan walked in, looking around at the space. "This is incredible." I put down my paintbrush, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Thanks for coming." He continued walking through the space, taking in the high ceilings, the art supplies organized on shelves, the works in progress pinned to the walls. "I've been thinking about what you said to Christopher, about Dad knowing what we each needed." I waited, letting him process. Dylan went on, "I've made a lot of money. I have a beautiful house, expensive cars, all the things I thought would make me happy. But you know what? I can't remember the last time I felt this kind of passion about anything. These kids, they're here on a Saturday morning painting walls because they believe in something." I smiled. "It's pretty amazing, isn't it?" Dylan turned to me. "I want to help. Not with money, though I'll donate if you need it. But I want to help build this. Can I?" That's when I started crying. My brother, who I'd thought cared only about profit margins and stock options, wanted to be part of this. I managed to say, yes, absolutely. Over the next few months, something beautiful happened. Dylan became a regular volunteer, teaching a coding class that integrated technology with visual art. Marcus started a fundraising committee among his medical colleagues. Even Christopher, after some time, came around. He didn't volunteer, but he made a substantial donation and used his business connections to get us corporate sponsors. The grand opening happened on a rainy Saturday in October, exactly 1 year after Dad's death. We called it the Turner Center for Creative Arts. Over 200 people showed up. Kids from the neighborhood, parents, local artists, teachers, reporters, and my brothers with their families. I stood in front of everyone, microphone in hand, looking at the space that had transformed from an abandoned warehouse into a thriving hub of creativity. The walls were covered with student artwork. Natural light poured through those magnificent windows. The air hummed with possibility. I began my speech. A year ago, I thought my father had given me nothing. An old letter when my brothers received millions seemed like a final confirmation that I'd disappointed him. But that letter led me here, to this moment, to this place where kids who never thought they could be artists are creating masterpieces, where creativity isn't a luxury but a right. I saw my brothers in the crowd. Christopher had tears in his eyes. Marcus was holding his daughter, whispering something to her and pointing at a painting. Dylan gave me a thumbs up. I continued, "My father wrote that I was different from my brothers, that I scared him because he didn't understand my world, but he tried. He bought this building when I was 16 and held on to it, believing that someday I'd be ready for it. And you know what the most beautiful part is? He was right." The crowd erupted in applause, but I wasn't finished. Money is important. I'm not naive about that. We need resources to survive, to build, to grow. But my father taught me that legacy isn't about how much you leave behind. It's about what you inspire others to become. My brothers received their inheritance and they've used it well. They've expanded businesses, saved lives, created jobs. But I received something different. I received belief. And that belief has multiplied into this. After the ceremony, people lingered for hours. Kids gave tours of their favorite parts of the center. Parents thanked me with tears streaming down their faces. One mother, Maria, grabbed my hands. Maria said to me, her voice shaking, "My son was failing school. He felt stupid, worthless. Then he started coming here. Last week he told me he wants to be a designer. He has hope again. You gave him that." These moments made everything worthwhile. Every struggle to make rent, every time I'd felt less than my brothers, every sacrifice I'd made to stay true to my path. It all made sense now. Late that night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the center. Dylan had stayed to help clean up but had just headed home. The space was quiet, lit only by the streetlights filtering through those enormous windows. I pulled out Dad's letter again. I'd read it hundreds of times, but it felt different now. I understood something I hadn't before. Dad's gift wasn't just the building, it was permission to be exactly who I was meant to be. The next few months brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. Funding was constantly tight. Equipment broke. Some volunteers didn't show up. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I should have taken money instead and lived an easier life. But then a 13-year-old named Marcus, coincidentally sharing my brother's name, had his first art show at the center. He'd been in foster care his entire life, moving from home to home, never feeling like he belonged anywhere. His paintings were raw and emotional, depicting his journey through the system. Young Marcus told me during his show, tears in his eyes, "This is the first place that ever felt like home. The first place where people saw me, really saw me." I hugged him and I thought about Dad's letter, about being seen, about how the greatest gift we can give someone is to truly recognize who they are. The center's impact grew beyond what I'd imagined. We expanded our programs to include dance, music, and creative writing. Local high schools started partnering with us. The mayor visited and announced a city grant. News outlets from around the country came to document our model. But the most meaningful changes were the small ones. The shy kid who started speaking up in class, the teenager who stopped skipping school because she had art class to look forward to, the single mother who took our adult evening classes and discovered a talent for sculpture she never knew she had. I started keeping a journal of these transformations because I needed to remember why I was doing this during the hard days. And there were still hard days. Days when funding fell through. Days when equipment broke and we couldn't afford to replace it. Days when I lay awake at 3 a.m. wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. One entry from that journal still makes me cry when I read it. It was about a boy named Jordan, 12 years old, who came to us through a referral from his school counselor. He'd been caught vandalizing school property, spray painting walls with angry, violent images. He was facing expulsion. His mother, Carmen, brought him to my office, her eyes red from crying. Carmen pleaded with me, "Please, Miss Turner. Jordan is a good kid. His father left us last year and he's angry. So angry. But I see how he draws in his notebook. He has something inside him that needs to come out. Can you help him?" Jordan sat slumped in his chair, hood up, refusing to make eye contact. I could see the pain radiating off him like heat. I said to him gently, "Jordan, I'm not going to lecture you. I'm not going to tell you what you did was wrong because you already know that. But I am curious about something. Can I see what you draw?" He didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pulled a crumpled notebook from his backpack and slid it across my desk without looking up. I opened it carefully and found pages and pages of incredibly detailed drawings. Dark, yes. Angry, absolutely. But also technically brilliant. This kid had talent that took my breath away. I told him honestly, Jordan, these are extraordinary. You have a gift, a real gift. But right now, you're using it to hurt yourself and other people. What if we channeled this into something that could heal instead? He finally looked up at me, his eyes defensive. Like what? I thought quickly. What if you created a mural, a legal one, on one of our exterior walls? Something that tells your story but also gives hope to other kids going through hard times. I'll provide the supplies, the wall, the time. You bring the vision. Jordan's mother started crying again. Jordan's face showed the first crack in his armor. He asked suspiciously, "Why would you let me do that? I'm the kid who spray painted the school." I met his eyes directly. Because I believe that kid made a mistake but isn't a mistake. And because your art matters. It deserves to be seen in a place where it's valued, not on a wall where it gets you in trouble. Jordan worked on that mural for 3 months. Every afternoon after school, he was at the center sketching, planning, painting. His mother told me she'd never seen him so focused, so alive. The anger didn't disappear overnight, but it started transforming into something productive. The mural he created showed a figure breaking free from chains, reaching toward light. It was raw and emotional and absolutely stunning. When we unveiled it at a community event, Jordan stood in front of it and spoke to the crowd. Jordan said, his voice shaking but strong, "I was drowning. I was so angry I couldn't see anything else. Miss Turner gave me a way to show what I was feeling without destroying things. This mural is about breaking free from the stuff that holds you back. It's about choosing to create instead of destroy." The crowd gave him a standing ovation. His mother was sobbing in the front row, and Jordan smiled for the first time since I'd met him. That mural became one of our center's most photographed features. But more importantly, Jordan became one of our regular students, then a peer mentor, then eventually, years later, a teaching assistant. He never vandalized another building. Instead, he became known for creating murals around the city that brought beauty to neglected neighborhoods. Stories like Jordan's happened over and over. There was Amelia, a 16-year-old who'd been bullied so severely she'd attempted suicide. She found poetry at our center and started performing at our open mic nights. The act of standing on stage and speaking her truth began healing something deep inside her. 2 years later, she published her first collection of poems and dedicated it to the center. There was Marcus, the kid in foster care I mentioned earlier, who eventually aged out of the system at 18 with nowhere to go. We hired him as our facilities coordinator, giving him not just a job, but a purpose. He lived in a small apartment we'd converted above the center's storage area until he saved enough to get his own place. He told me once that the center was the first place that ever felt like home. There was Destiny, a single mother of 3 who took our evening painting classes as an escape from her overwhelmingly stressful life. She discovered she had a talent for portraits. She started selling her work at our monthly art markets, then at galleries downtown. Eventually, she was making enough to quit her second job and spend more time with her kids. She credits art with saving her family. Each story reinforced what Dad had known, but I'd taken years to understand. Money could provide security and comfort, but purpose provided meaning. And meaning was what made life worth living. The relationship with my brothers continued to deepen in unexpected ways. Christopher's daughter Emma started taking classes at the center. She was 8 years old and full of creative energy that her private school didn't quite know what to do with. Christopher brought her one Saturday morning, looking uncomfortable in the creative chaos of the center. Christopher said to me, pulling me aside, "Emma asked specifically to come here. She saw a news story about the center and said she wanted to take classes where kids from all different places could learn together. I didn't understand it at first. She goes to an exclusive school with every resource imaginable. Why would she want to come here?" I watched Emma laughing with a group of kids from the neighborhood, already covered in paint. I said to Christopher, "Because privilege can be isolating. She wants to be part of something real, something diverse, something that matters beyond her bubble. That's actually a good sign. You're raising a kid with empathy." Christopher's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not sure I taught her that. I think you did. By building this place, by showing her there's a different way to measure success. She talks about you all the time, about how you gave up money to follow your dream. She thinks you're brave." That conversation shifted something between Christopher and me. He started bringing Emma every Saturday and staying to volunteer. He taught a business class for teenagers interested in entrepreneurship, helping them understand financial literacy and planning. He was good at it, patient in a way I'd never seen him be before. One afternoon, he stayed after class to help clean up. Christopher said while stacking chairs, "You know what's weird? I make more money in a day than I used to make in a month, but I've never felt as rich as I do here, watching these kids learn." I replied, "That's not weird. That's wisdom." Marcus brought his medical expertise to the center in a different way. He started offering free health screenings for families who couldn't afford regular checkups. He recruited other doctors from his practice to volunteer once a month. He told me it reminded him why he'd wanted to become a doctor in the first place, before the paperwork and insurance companies and bureaucracy had clouded his purpose. One afternoon, about 18 months after opening, Christopher stopped by. We sat in my small office, surrounded by student artwork and grant applications. Christopher spoke first. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about Dad knowing what we each needed." I looked at him, and he seemed uncomfortable, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him. "I think I was angry because some part of me knew you got the better deal. Not financially, but in terms of what really matters." I reached across the desk and took his hand. "Chris, there's no better or worse, just different. You're providing for your family, creating jobs, building security. That matters too." Christopher shook his head. "But when I die, will people remember my car dealerships? Will they talk about how many units I sold? You're changing actual lives, Becca. You're creating something that will outlive all of us." I felt tears forming. "You can create that too, it's not too late." He smiled sadly. "Maybe. I've been thinking about starting a scholarship program for kids who want to go into business but can't afford it. Kids who remind me of myself when I was young." I squeezed his hand. "That's beautiful. Do it." Over the next year, something unexpected happened. My brothers and I became closer than we'd ever been. The inheritance that could have divided us permanently instead became a bridge to understanding. We started having monthly dinners, talking about more than just surface-level stuff. They asked about the center, and I asked about their lives beyond their successes. Marcus confessed one night, "I spent so much of my life chasing Dad's approval, becoming a surgeon, building a practice, making money, but I don't think I ever asked myself if it made me happy." Dylan added, "Same here. I sold my startup and made millions, but then what? I just started another company to chase the same high. It's exhausting." Christopher nodded. "At least you two have noble professions. I sell cars. I'm good at it. But sometimes I wonder if that's enough." I looked at my brothers, these men I'd envied and resented at different points in my life. Dad gave us what we needed at the time, but we're not frozen in those moments. We can evolve. We can choose what matters now. The center celebrated its second anniversary with a massive community festival. Over 1,000 people attended. We had live performances, art demonstrations, and an exhibition of work from our students. The local news covered it. The mayor gave a speech about the importance of arts education. But the moment that mattered most to me was small and private. A girl named Lily, 17 years old, pulled me aside. She'd been coming to the center since we opened, a quiet kid who'd experienced more trauma than anyone should endure. Lily held out a college acceptance letter. "I got into the Rhode Island School of Design, full scholarship." I screamed and hugged her. Other people turned to look, but I didn't care. Lily continued, her voice shaking. 2 years ago, I was planning to drop out of high school. I didn't see the point. Then I found this place, and you told me I had talent. You were the first person who ever said that to me. I'm going to college because of you." I was crying now, not trying to hide it. "You're going to college because of you. Because you worked hard and believed in yourself." Lily shook her head. "No, Miss Turner. I believed in myself because you believed in me first. That's the difference." That night, sitting in my apartment, I pulled out Dad's letter one more time. The paper was worn from handling, the words familiar as a prayer, but I saw something I'd missed before. At the very bottom, in smaller handwriting, like he'd added it later, was one more line. It read, "The greatest wealth is knowing who you are and having the courage to live it. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that. I hope this gift helps you keep being exactly who you are." I thought about everything that had happened, the pain of feeling less than my brothers, the shock of the inheritance disparity, the discovery of the warehouse, the building of the center, the lives changed, the relationships healed. My brothers had received 50 million Reais each. I'd received an old letter and a building. By every conventional measure, they'd gotten more. But sitting there, thinking about Lily's acceptance letter, about young Marcus finding home, about the hundreds of kids who'd walked through our doors and discovered their voices, I knew something profound. Dad had given me the greater inheritance after all. Not despite the letter, but because of it. Because that letter, that building, that trust had forced me to become the fullest version of myself, to stop seeking external validation and start trusting my own path. The money would eventually run out. It always does. But what I was building, what these kids were creating, what this community was becoming, that was permanent. That was legacy. I texted my brothers in our group chat. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. I know the inheritance was strange and probably hurt, but I want you to know I understand now why Dad did it. He wasn't being cruel. He was being a father to each of us individually, and I'm grateful. Christopher responded first. I'm the one who's grateful. Watching you build the center taught me what courage really looks like. Marcus sent, you inspired me to start volunteering at the free clinic. Turns out helping people without worrying about insurance reimbursement is incredibly fulfilling. Dylan wrote, you changed how I think about success. I'm starting a nonprofit to teach coding to underprivileged kids. Want to partner on a program? I stared at my phone, overwhelmed. The inheritance hadn't divided us. It had revealed us to ourselves and each other. 3 years after Dad's death, I stood in the center on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The space was full of students working on various projects. The hum of creativity filled the air. Sun poured through those magnificent windows, illuminating paint-splattered tables and works in progress. We'd served over 2,000 students by that point. 2,000 lives touched in ways big and small. The walls were covered with their art, each piece telling a story of transformation, discovery, or healing. I walked through the space slowly, taking it all in. In one corner, a group of teenagers worked on a collaborative sculpture addressing climate change. In another, elderly community members took a watercolor class taught by one of our former students. The dance studio echoed with music as young kids learned hip-hop choreography. The quiet room reserved for writing was full of people hunched over notebooks, lost in their own worlds. This was what Dad had envisioned when he bought that warehouse 28 years ago. Not the specific programs or the exact structure, but the spirit of it. A place where creativity mattered more than credentials, where passion trumped profit, where people could discover parts of themselves they didn't know existed. A new student, maybe 14 years old, approached me nervously. Her name was Claire. Claire asked hesitantly, Miss Turner? I've never done art before. I don't think I'm any good. Should I even be here? I smiled, remembering being that girl. Unsure, doubting, wondering if I belonged. I told Claire, art isn't about being good. It's about being honest. It's about taking what's inside you and putting it into the world. You belong here because you're brave enough to try. She smiled, still uncertain but willing. I watched her walk to an easel and pick up a brush. Her first stroke was hesitant, then another. Then she stopped thinking and started creating. I thought about how many times I'd had that exact conversation. How many kids had come to us convinced they weren't creative, weren't talented, weren't worthy, and how many had left believing in themselves in ways they never had before. My phone buzzed. A text from the director of education for the entire school district. They wanted to use our center as a model for a citywide program. They were offering partnership and funding to expand our reach to every public school in the area. I read the message twice, 3 times. This meant we could help thousands more kids. This meant the model would spread. This meant Dad's investment would multiply beyond anything I'd imagined. But there was more work to be done before we could expand. I'd learned that growth had to be thoughtful, intentional. We couldn't sacrifice quality for quantity. Every new location would need the same heart, the same commitment to authentic transformation that we'd built here. I called a staff meeting for that evening. Our team had grown to 12 people, each one as passionate about the mission as I was. We gathered in the main studio after the students had left for the day. I shared the news with them, watching their faces light up with excitement. Sarah, our program director, spoke first. This is incredible, but we need to be strategic. We can't just replicate what we do here. Each community needs something specific to their culture and challenges. David, who taught music, added, we should train teachers from those schools to run their own programs. Give them the tools and philosophy, but let them make it their own. This was why I loved our team. They didn't just see opportunities for expansion. They saw responsibilities. They understood that what we'd built was fragile and precious, and scaling it required wisdom and care. We spent 3 hours that night planning. Not just the logistics of expansion, but the values we needed to protect. The commitment to accessibility. The refusal to compromise on quality. The insistence that every student be seen as an individual, not a number. When everyone left, I stayed behind like I often did. The center felt different at night. Quieter, but somehow more alive with potential. I walked from room to room, touching the art on the walls, reading the notes students had left for each other on our community board. One note caught my eye. It was from Jordan, the kid who'd created the mural years ago. He'd written it to a new student who was struggling. It said, I know you feel like you don't fit anywhere. I felt that way too. But this place taught me that being different isn't a weakness. It's your superpower. Keep creating, keep showing up, you belong here. I photographed that note and texted it to my brothers with a caption. This is what Dad's inheritance created. Christopher responded immediately. I'm crying at my desk. My assistant thinks something's wrong. Marcus sent, we should all be so lucky to leave this kind of legacy. Dylan wrote, can we have dinner tomorrow? All of us? I want to hear more about the expansion plans. We met the next evening at a small Italian restaurant near the center. It had become our regular spot for family dinners, a far cry from the formal steakhouses we used to frequent when Dad was alive. Over pasta and wine, I told them everything. The district partnership, the plans for expansion, the challenges ahead. They listened with attention I'd once thought they reserved only for business deals and medical conferences. When I finished, Marcus raised his glass. Marcus said, looking at each of us, to Rebecca, who taught us that being rich has nothing to do with bank accounts, who showed us what courage really looks like, who turned Dad's faith into something that will outlive all of us. We clinked glasses, and I felt emotions I couldn't name. Gratitude, pride, belonging. But also something else. Validation, maybe. The knowledge that my path, as unconventional and difficult as it had been, was exactly right. Christopher spoke next, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I need to tell you all something. I've decided to sell 2 of my dealerships. I'm keeping one, but I want to start a foundation that provides business education to underprivileged youth. I've been thinking about it since seeing what Becca built. I want to create something that matters beyond profit margins. We all stared at him. Christopher, who'd once measured his worth entirely by his financial success, was voluntarily reducing his empire to create meaning. Dylan grinned. Since we're sharing, I'm dividing my time now. 50% on my business, 50% on the nonprofit teaching coding to kids. Best decision I've ever made. I sleep better. I'm happier. My wife says I'm more present. Marcus nodded. The free clinic I started is expanding to 3 locations. I'm taking a pay cut to make it happen, but I don't care. I feel like I'm actually making a difference now. I looked at my brothers, these men who'd once seemed so far removed from my world, and saw how we'd all transformed. Dad's inheritance hadn't just given us money or buildings. It had given us permission to evolve. I said to them, tears streaming down my face, Dad would be so proud of all of us. Not because we're successful, because we're finally living authentically. I read the message twice, 3 times. This meant we could help thousands more kids. This meant the model would spread. This meant Dad's investment would multiply beyond anything I'd imagined. But more than that, it meant the letter was right. The one he'd written 28 years ago to a 4-year-old girl. The one that said I was different, that I valued things beyond profit, that I would create something beautiful. He'd seen me before I'd seen myself, and he'd given me the tools to become exactly that person. I walked to my office and pulled out the framed letter I now kept on my wall. Beside it was a photo of Dad from my childhood, his arm around me at one of my school art shows. He wasn't smiling broadly like he did in pictures with my brothers at their graduations, but his eyes held something deeper. Pride, understanding, love. I touched the glass over his face. Thank you, Dad. I understand now. I finally understand. The inheritance my brothers received would build wealth, security, and opportunity for their families. It was significant and important, but the inheritance I received built something different. It built purpose. It built community. It built a legacy of creativity and belief that would ripple outward for generations. 50 million Reais could buy a lot of things, but it couldn't buy the feeling of watching a kid discover their voice. It couldn't buy the moment when a struggling student realizes they matter. It couldn't buy the knowledge that you're living exactly as you're meant to live. Dad knew that. He'd always known that. And now, finally, so did I. But understanding it intellectually was different from living it daily. There were still moments of doubt. Still times when I wondered what my life would have been like with 50 million Reais. Would I have traveled the world, bought a beautiful house, never worried about money again? Maybe. Probably. But then I'd walk into the center and see Destiny painting portraits, supporting her family with her art. I'd see Jordan mentoring a new student who reminded him of his younger self. I'd see Amelia performing poetry that helped other kids feel less alone. And I'd know, deep in my bones, that I'd made the right choice. That Dad had made the right choice for me. The expansion with the school district took 2 years to implement properly. We trained teachers from 15 different schools, helped them set up programs in their buildings, provided ongoing support and resources. Each school adapted the model to fit their community's needs. Some focused more on music, others on visual arts, others on creative writing. But they all shared the core philosophy. Every student has creative potential that deserves to be nurtured. During this time, I started receiving invitations to speak at conferences about arts education. At first, I declined. Public speaking terrified me, and I didn't feel qualified to present myself as an expert. But Jasmine, always my voice of reason, convinced me otherwise. Jasmine told me firmly one evening over dinner, "Rebecca, you have something to say that people need to hear. You've built something from nothing. You've changed lives. You've proven that passion and purpose matter as much as profit. Share that story. Other people need to know it's possible." So I started accepting invitations. My first speech was at a regional education conference. I was so nervous I nearly threw up before walking on stage. But once I started talking, once I shared Dad's letter and the journey of building the center, something shifted. People weren't just listening politely. They were crying. They were taking notes frantically. They were waiting in line afterward to tell me their own stories of choosing purpose over profit. One woman approached me after that first speech, her eyes red from crying. She introduced herself saying, "My name is Patricia. I'm a lawyer making $300,000 a year, and I hate my life. I went to law school because my parents wanted me to, because it was practical and secure. But I've always wanted to teach music. Your story made me realize I'm living someone else's dream, not my own. I'm going to make a change. Thank you for giving me the courage." I hugged her, this stranger who saw her own struggle reflected in my journey. I told her honestly, it won't be easy. You'll lose things, money, status, comfort, but you'll gain yourself. And that trade is always worth it. Over the next few years, I lost count of how many people told me similar stories. The accountant who quit to become a chef, the engineer who left to write novels, the banker who walked away to start a nonprofit. Each one had heard my story and found permission to pursue their own authenticity. This impact humbled me in ways I couldn't articulate. I'd thought the center was my legacy, but it was bigger than that. The center was one expression of a larger truth, that we all deserve to live aligned with our values, even when the world tells us we're foolish for doing so. My relationship with my brothers continued to deepen. We'd moved from surface-level family gatherings to genuine emotional intimacy. Christopher started therapy to work through his workaholism and need for external validation. Marcus took a sabbatical to volunteer with Doctors Without Borders, something he'd always dreamed of doing. Dylan started bringing his kids to the center regularly, wanting them to understand that impact mattered more than income. We gathered for holidays with a new appreciation for each other. The old competitiveness had evaporated, replaced by genuine curiosity about each other's lives. We talked about our struggles openly. We supported each other's growth. We'd become the family Dad probably always hoped we'd be. On the 5th anniversary of Dad's death, we all went to the cemetery together. It was the first time we'd been there as a unit since the funeral. We brought flowers and stories and gratitude. Christopher spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad, I thought you were being unfair when you divided the inheritance unequally. I thought you loved Becca less. But I understand now. You loved each of us exactly right. You gave us what we needed to become who we were meant to be. Thank you for knowing me better than I knew myself." Marcus added, "You showed me that success isn't measured in surgeries performed or papers published. It's measured in lives touched, in presence, in choosing meaning over status. I'm a better doctor because of the lessons your estate planning taught me." Dylan's voice cracked as he spoke. "You gave me money, but Becca's journey taught me what to do with it, how to make it matter, how to use resources to create opportunity for others. I'm trying to be the kind of man you'd be proud of." Then it was my turn. I knelt by his headstone, placing my hand on the cold granite. I said to him, my tears falling freely, "Dad, I spent so many years thinking I'd disappointed you, that choosing art over business meant I'd failed somehow. But your letter showed me you understood me better than I understood myself. You gave me a gift that keeps multiplying. Every kid who walks through the center's doors, every life that changes, every person who finds their voice, that's because you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I miss you every single day, but I feel you in every brushstroke, every opened door, every moment of transformation. You're not gone. You're everywhere." We stood there together, 4 siblings who'd been shaped by the same man in different ways, united not by equal inheritance, but by equal love and the wisdom to see that fairness doesn't mean sameness. As we walked back to our cars, Christopher put his arm around me. Christopher said softly, "You know what's funny? I have 47 million Reais left after investments and expenses. That's a lot of money. But if someone offered me that amount to trade places with you, to have what you have, I wouldn't do it. What you built can't be bought." I leaned into him, My brother, who I'd once thought cared only about wealth and status. What we built, I corrected him. All of us. We each took what Dad gave us and tried to honor it. That's what he wanted. As I left the center that evening, I passed a new mural our students had created. It showed a tree with deep roots and spreading branches. Written around the roots were words like belief, courage, authenticity, and love. On the branches were words like creativity, community, hope, and legacy. One of the students had added a small dedication at the bottom. To Miss Turner, who taught us that the richest people aren't those with the most money, but those with the most purpose. I stood there crying happy tears, because that 14-year-old kid understood what had taken me years to learn, what Dad had tried to teach me with that letter, what his carefully planned inheritance had forced me to discover. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in lives touched, in courage lived, in authenticity honored. It's measured in the moments when you help someone else discover who they really are. My brothers got 50 million Reais each. I got an old letter and a warehouse, and I wouldn't trade places with them for anything in the world. Because Dad gave me something more valuable than money. He gave me permission to be myself, and that inheritance will never run out. That night, back in my apartment, I did something I'd been avoiding for years. I finally went through the rest of Dad's belongings that had been in storage. My brothers had divided up the expensive items, the watches and cufflinks and collectibles. What remained were the personal things nobody else wanted. Photo albums, old letters, notebooks. I found a journal Dad had kept during the last year of his life. My hands shook as I opened it, unsure if I wanted to read his private thoughts. But something compelled me forward. The entries were sporadic, not daily, but written when something important happened. I flipped through, seeing notes about business deals, family events, health concerns. Then I found an entry dated 6 months before he died. It read, "Watched Rebecca teach her art class today through the window. She doesn't know I was there. The way she engages with those kids, the patience she shows, the way she makes each one feel seen and valued. I built a construction empire worth hundreds of millions, but I've never created anything as beautiful as the person my daughter has become. I'm leaving her the warehouse tomorrow. I hope she understands it's not about the building. It's about believing in her vision when she struggles to believe in herself." I sobbed reading those words. He'd come to watch me teach. He'd seen me in my element and been proud. All those years I thought he was disappointed. He was actually watching with pride. There were more entries about me scattered throughout the journal. Notes about my divorce and his worry for me. Comments about my students and their progress. Reflections on how I'd chosen a harder path, but a more meaningful one. One entry, written just a month before he died, said, "I'm meeting with Harrison tomorrow to finalize everything. Marcus will use his inheritance to expand his practice. Christopher will grow his business. Dylan will invest wisely. They'll all be fine financially. But Rebecca, my Rebecca, she needs something different. She needs to know I see her, that I've always seen her, that her choice to follow her heart over security is the bravest thing any of my children has done. I'm giving her the warehouse and the trust fund, but really I'm giving her validation. I hope it's enough." It was enough, Dad. It was more than enough. I read through the entire journal that night, discovering a version of my father I'd never fully known. A man who struggled with expressing emotion but felt deeply. A man who understood his children in ways we'd never given him credit for. A man who planned his estate not with cold calculation but with profound love. There was an entry about each of my brothers, too, explaining his reasoning for their inheritances. For Christopher, he needs capital to reach his full potential. But more than that, he needs to know I trust him to build something lasting. For Marcus, his work saves lives. He needs resources to do it without the crushing weight of debt. For Dylan, he has the entrepreneurial spirit I recognize in myself. I'm giving him the foundation to take risks without fear. Dad had thought through every decision carefully, lovingly. The unequal distribution wasn't about loving any of us more or less. It was about loving each of us specifically, uniquely, appropriately. The next morning, I called my brothers and asked them to come over. When they arrived, I shared what I'd found. We passed Dad's journal around, reading his words about each of us, crying together over this unexpected gift of understanding. Marcus said through tears, "I thought he was just being practical with the money. I didn't realize there was so much thought and love behind it." Dylan added, "He knew us better than we knew ourselves. How did he figure us out so clearly?" Christopher, who'd struggled most with the inheritance disparity, looked at me with new eyes. "Becca, I owe you an apology. A real one. I was so focused on the money that I completely missed what Dad was actually doing. He wasn't just dividing assets. He was giving each of us exactly what we needed to become our best selves. I'm sorry I made you feel less than. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I hugged him, this brother who'd once seemed so distant and materialistic. We were all learning. We're still learning. That's okay. We spent that afternoon reading through the journal together, discovering our father in new ways. He'd been neither perfect nor particularly good at expressing love, but he'd tried in the way he knew how, through careful planning and thoughtful provision. The journal became another part of our family legacy, passed between us when someone needed perspective or encouragement. It reminded us that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it looks like an old letter. Sometimes it looks like a warehouse. Sometimes it looks like money to invest. Always, if we look closely enough, it looks like understanding. Years continued to pass. The center expanded to 8 locations across the state. Thousands of students cycled through our programs. Some became professional artists. Most didn't. But all of them learned that creativity matters, that their voices deserve to be heard, that they have value beyond what they produce or earn. I never remarried after Daniel. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. My life was full in ways that didn't require a romantic partner. I had my work, my students, my brothers and their families, my community of artists and teachers and dreamers. I had purpose and meaning and impact. What more could anyone want? On quiet days, I still pulled out Dad's letter and read it. The paper was fragile now, worn from handling. I'd had it professionally preserved and framed, but I kept a copy in my wallet for moments when I needed reminding of who I was and why I was here. The letter's final line never failed to move me. The greatest wealth is knowing who you are and having the courage to live it. I knew who I was now. I was Rebecca Turner, daughter of a man who saw me clearly and loved me specifically. I was the founder of something that mattered beyond profit. I was a teacher who believed every student had untapped potential. I was a sister who'd learned that family isn't about competition but connection. I was a woman who'd chosen meaning over money and never regretted it. My brothers got 50 million Reais each. I got an old letter and a warehouse. And in the end, we all got exactly what we needed to become who we were meant to be. That was Dad's final gift to us. Not the money or the building, but the wisdom to understand that different doesn't mean unequal. That love can be expressed in ways that initially seem harsh, but are actually profoundly kind. That the best inheritance isn't financial security, but the permission and resources to live authentically. I thought I'd been slighted. I thought I'd been overlooked. I thought 50 million Reais to my brothers and a letter to me meant I mattered less. I was wrong about everything. I mattered differently. And different, I finally understood, was exactly right.